Chapter 571 Let me show you. Even though he had only seen through the mana circulation and necessary amount of mana required by the girl to manifest the dragon head, Jason felt intrigued. This was mainly because Solaris transmitted to him that it wanted to test doing the same thing the female dragon youth was doing. As such, he decided to agree to his soulbond's wish and used most of his mana to release into the small black flame that Solaris had manifested on his hand. The small black flame was transformed into a tiny dragon head, the size of Jason's thumb before it received the first batch of mana, allowing it to grow substantially. It took much longer to control and form the black flame dragon head than Jason assumed, but that didn't matter because the female dragon youth had to fight with the injuries she had sustained. Meanwhile, she was also trying to control the secret technique she was using to an extent she had never tested out before. Because the dragon youth had to focus on two things instead of one, Jason had the advantage that he had more than enough time to focus on his own attack. He could have thrown the dragon youth out of the arena ring already, but he could feel Solaris' excitement and couldn't help but smile brightly. The black flame dragon head had already reached the size of his hands as Jason noticed that the golden strands had accumulated at the area where the eyeballs of the dragon should normally be. Through this, the replica of a black flame dragon with golden eyes had been born, before the vast majority of Jason's mana shot into the hand-sized flame that erupted, inflating at a rapid pace. At the same time, a thunderous roar, amplified by Solaris' abilities, resounded throughout the Colosseum. The golden-eyed black dragon replica had roared against the heavens, spewing out mighty flames that licked the air. Jason's excitement caused his Celestia aura and stigma to ignite, merging with Solaris' stigma that had also begun to shine in a bright golden silverish light. Both Jason and the black dragon's golden eyes began to glow, and Jason cast a fleeting glance at the old female dragon youth who had wanted to brag about her descendant earlier before he turned his head back to the young dragon youth in front of him. Evade it, or someone else will have to grieve your death. Jason knew that he sounded arrogant, but the sheer might he sensed in his arm was more than enough to burn the young dragon youth and reduce her into a pile of ashes. Furthermore, he was one of the people that liked showing off their strength, preventing others from needlessly offending him. He felt like showing what he was capable of in small batches was the best to achieve this, which was something he had learned in the Vanguard School. It might not be suitable while facing other races, but this was only something he could figure out by experimenting. After he had said what was necessary, Jason waited another 3 seconds, allowing everyone to understand that he had issued a warning and that he wouldn't be at fault for the repercussions that would follow. That was also the reason he had looked at the old female dragon youth, who had turned eerily silent. Since Jason had released his replica of the true dragon manifestation, she knew that something was wrong. As such, she was about to rescue her youngest descendant, only to be held back by the Clarier next to her. Didn't you hear what our representative said? Nobody is allowed to intervene in the fights, and Olivia seems to be doing fine for now, doesn't she? At that moment, the old dragon youth felt like killing the Clarier next to her. In an effort to calm herself down from attacking him, she gritted her teeth and instead shot up from her seat. Then she released a strand of mana which she threw towards Olivia, who still harbored the will to continue fighting. Leave the arena, you idiot. If you die, I will never forgive you. The Liberation Tournament is not worth receiving a permanent injury, let alone dying for. Olivia had only heard the second dragon roar, without knowing what exactly it was, as her eyes had been closed. She had to temporarily close her eyes in order to concentrate. All her focus had been directed to manifest a replica of a dragon head with the true dragon manifestation technique. As such, she could only now see the golden-eyed black flame dragon head that was double the size of the crimson-red dragon head she had manifested. Nervous, the dragon youth gulped down her saliva as a sliver of fear instilled within her, igniting in a mere moment as she lifted her hands to shoot the crimson-red dragon head towards Jason. Aiming to distract him with the dragon head, she rushed towards her right side, which was the nearest way to leave the arena. Why did I even try to continue fighting? She lamented while trying to fight the sensation that made her feel as if she was burning on the inside. Gritting her teeth, Olivia could only blame herself for being overconfident in the face of someone who was by all means superior to her. It was evident that Jason's attack would be stronger because he could use more mana due to the lower mana consumption of his Black Flame affinity. Additionally, his Black Flame's maximum output was at the peak of the 10th Lick Black Flame without the use of Solaris abilities. Thanks to that, Jason knew that he would be able to easily overpower the young woman. At the same time, he also noticed that his control over the massive amount of mana and Solaris Flame compressed into the form of a dragon head was more difficult than expected. Through the Emperor eyes he had only seen how the true dragon manifestation worked, one single time, and it was Solaris that had been confident to replicate the same attack. However, now that the dragon head was fully formed with the vast majority of his mana, Jason could tell that he shouldn't play around with techniques he hadn't trained with before, and at least had read the techniques manual beforehand. This was also the reason why he had looked at the Dragonute Elder, hoping that she would take care of her descendant, because Jason assumed Olivia to be as confident in emerging victorious as he had been about himself. The only difference was that Jason's Emperor eyes could tell the difference between his attack and Olivia's, in addition to their corresponding strength. Olivia was already injured and Jason was perfectly fine, thus he hoped that she would leave the arena. Fortunately, she had done exactly the same after the Dragonute Elder had used voice transmission to tell her something. She had hastily thrown the crimson red dragon head towards Jason and rushed towards the exit. "Alright, let's show what a dragon replica could look like," Jason said with a bright smile on his face as he lifted both of his hands before he gave the golden-eyed black dragon head a nudge. Jason's hands itched to let off some steam ever since he had encountered the soul fraction of a mysterious being within his body. It made him feel uncomfortable, as if a ticking time bomb had been implanted into his body. However, at the same time, he could tell that the being didn't want to harm him and that it was sincerely helping Jason to seal his bloodline, which seemed to have saved his and his mother's life, allowing him to arrive in the world. Nevertheless, this didn't change anything because the unknown made him feel even worse, while every passing day made him feel like he knew nothing about his mother, let alone his maternal grandparents. Everything seemed to have become messier than it was before, and Jason had decided to let go of his emotions as fast as possible instead of bottling them up. He didn't want to leave a single chance to fate to transform into an infernal Celestia after all. Seeing the golden-eyed black dragon fly through the air, devouring the crimson red flame dragon, Jason felt as if his mind was freed and a faint smile emerged on his face. "I guess it's time to finish the Liberation Tournament as soon as possible, Greg. Malia, I'm coming, and Nathan, you'll tell me everything." Chapter 572 Interesting Change by Hydesgrain. The golden-eyed black flame dragon head Jason had fired in Olivia's direction devoured the crimson red dragon head she had thrown at him before fleeing from the arena ring. Despite that, her life as well as that of the other spectators with a lower cultivation base was in danger, as the entire Colosseum was heating up at a rapid pace. Instead of becoming weaker, the golden-eyed black dragon Solaris and Jason had manifested seemed to become stronger by devouring the true dragon manifestation the female Dragonute had tried to create. From a strength that was already reaching the threshold of a first Prisma stage attack, Jason's copy of the true dragon manifestation became even stronger as it brushed past Olivia at a rapid pace. The black flame dragon head broke through the defensive layers each combat ring had installed, forcing the guards at the Primsar stage, that had been employed to protect the spectators, to act. There was always the possibility of a stray attack breaking through the protection mechanism, and it was a rather common occurrence in the Liberation Tournament. However, under normal circumstances the attack would have weakened due to the force that had to be utilized in piercing the multitude of protection layers. Unfortunately, this was not the case with Jason's attack because Solaris' mana nullification ability had received a severe amplification when it had devoured the crimson red dragon head. As such, the guards that were merely at the low rank of the Prisma stage's first threshold, could only grit their teeth and use their own attack to destroy that of Jason's. This was not the best solution, as the released mana fluctuations might accidentally injure spectators. In order to avoid such a scenario, it was necessary to defend against the attack, by letting several guards receive the brunt of the impact and protect the spectators. At that moment, Jason could only apologize in his mind as he had channelized his discomfort and anger towards the unknown into the attack he had just now utilized. Even though he could accept that his mother seemed to have requested the unknown being to help her in rescuing both of them, Jason still felt uncomfortable knowing that a fraction of the soul of an alien being was inside him. On the other hand, it might have been the only way for him to be born and his mother to survive giving birth to him because Jason didn't know anything about the Celestia race. However, that was exactly what caused Jason to feel so miserable. He had already more than enough unknown things to figure out, such as the question of what exactly the Celestia race was, what had happened to his mother in the past, who his grandparents were, or maybe finding out if they were still alive. But now the existence of an unknown being inside his body made everything even more annoying because Jason was able to utilize the chaos attribute the being had. However, using it without proper training could prove harmful for his body. As such, the soul fraction tried to prevent him from using the chaos attribute for his own good, leaving Jason both frustrated and confused. It was great to know that his mother had loved him dearly, and put his life over her own cultivation base that she destroyed willingly. Additionally, she had also severed her soul bond connection, only to return to Argos, but had all of that been really necessary? While there was not even a shred of doubt in his mind whether his mother had loved him or not, he wasn't too sure if everything she had done had been really worth it. Had there been no other solution to the predicament she had faced at that time? Had it been an unnecessary pain and grief she had to overcome? With all of these thoughts in his mind, he had created the golden-eyed black flame dragon and attacked with it. Unfortunately, the attack had been a little bit over the top because Jason hadn't expected that the technique utilized by the female dragon youth would amplify the flame's strength to such an extent, while Solaris' excitement to test something new had a similar effect. Owing to all these factors, Jason's current attack was stronger than he had wanted it to become, and it was fortunate for the dragon youth to have successfully evaded, otherwise, he might have killed her. Won't the government of the Olympus Federation think that I'm doing all of this intentionally? We are barely in the second combat round of the Liberation Tournament after all. While Jason was deep in thoughts, thinking that he might have created a tricky situation that could affect the future relationship of mankind and the Olympus Federation, Whis had already moved. He didn't really care about the spectators, instead, he wanted to see to what extent the Golden Eyes Black Flame Dragon head had been constructed. Whis had only once seen a true black dragon with crimson eyes, and this existence was already fearsome enough. Jason's manifestation might have looked profound to everyone else, but Whis found it rather crude, but even then he couldn't help but feel astonished. Did he copy the technique from the little girl during their small battle, or had he known it beforehand? At the same time, he was confused about the black flame itself. The fluctuations radiating from it were unique, and Whis could tell that it was a higher existence and something that shouldn't exist on Argos either. Knowing that it was something at par with a medium-grade origin flame or even stronger, such as a higher-grade origin flame, Whis acted on instinct as he appeared right in front of the golden-eyed black flame dragon head. He simply ignored the low first threshold Prisma stage guards while completely unfurling his wings that had already grown to a wingspan of more than 100 meters in total. At that moment, everyone realized that Whis was definitely not a normal dragonoid and watched in awe as a huge fiery red flame manifested in Whis's palm. After inserting a large amount of mana into the flame, he simply threw it toward the dragon head that roared out, seemingly in rage as it tried to devour the other dragon head. What happened afterward caused Whis's eyes to gleam brightly as he exclaimed just one word, "Interesting." He then instructed the highly compressed ball of fire to explode in the black dragon head's maw, forcefully separating the mana that was crudely put together. Whis had been forced to do this, instead of letting the fireball pierce through the dragon head, which was what he had planned to achieve in the beginning. This was because Solaris drained the fireball's mana slowly. The shocking sight of the dragon head dispersed in a fraction of time, before Whis returned to his place without saying anything. His dragon wings were once again retracted and he behaved as if nothing had happened. However, the spectators dropped jaws, as well as the Olympus Federation's higher-ups' expression, told a different story. With the second incident Jason had caused, the Liberation Tournament was halted because the elders had to speak with each other about Jason, and the danger he brought to their descendants. Meanwhile, Jason could only look at the commotion he had caused once again as he took a deep breath. His mind had been freed of the tension and he was able to think clearly about everything he had to do now. It was not much, but with Whiss's knowledge, he had a small thread to hold on to. Nodding his head towards Whiss, who had prevented the worst case from occurring, he averted his attention to Merlarths and the other human powerhouses. At that moment, the Olympus Federation's representative stepped forward, clearing his throat while amplifying the sound with mana as he announced something nobody had expected. Chapter 573 Battle Royale by Hydesgrain. With everyone's attention on the Olympus Federation's representative, he made a simple announcement that caused everyone to look at the old dragon youth in astonishment. Now that we had two severe incidents during the first two combat rounds of the Liberation Tournament, we want to implement two changes. The first and also most important rule we want to add is that the ancestors of the fighting participants are now allowed to end the fight by making the descendants give up. We don't want to have any casualties, and the old rules of the Liberation Tournament are not something we can use right now, not if we want to prevent any deaths from happening. This was interesting because it changed a rule that had been implemented 300 years ago, but everyone understood the cause. It was evident that Jason didn't want to kill anyone because he could have done so otherwise, and in order to prevent more similar accidents from occurring, the government's higher-ups had implemented a new rule. The old female dragon youth had already taken Olivia to the medic team that tended to the burns she had received. At the same time, Jason had already extinguished Solaris' flame within the dragon youth's body, preventing her from burning alive. With the things both mankind and the Olympus Federation had perceived during the last few hours, they realized that it would be best for them to work together. At least if they were to try to elevate their respective status in the face of other races, preventing scenarios like the Great Argos War, even if the world bridges were becoming stabler with time. At the same time, the combat prowess of the strongest individuals was evident and could be reinforced on both sides if their ties allowed them to trade resources, military forces, and so on. The opportunities were endless, and there were more than enough world bridges that led to places with lots of resources that had yet to be conquered. Thus they were happy about the newly implemented rule, and Jason was amongst the happiest. Good insights. He thought while letting it slide that such a rule should have already been enforced. The fact that the rule didn't exist was weird, but Jason ignored it as he heard the second statement made by the Olympus Federation's representative. Other than that, we want to change the combat rounds and implement a battle royale system. 50 participants will fight against each other at the same time, and only the last one standing will reach the quarterfinals. This was the announcement that astonished everyone because the combat rounds system had never been changed before. As such, an uproar swept through the entire Colosseum while Jason could only smile dryly as he returned to his friends. They weren't even astonished and simply said, "Good job," without feeling any excitement. Seeing this, Jason's smile widened as he remarked, "The Battle Royal will probably split us apart. There should be around 300 participants left in the third round, and we're a team of 6. Jason was not sure if his assumption was correct, but he thought that the reason for implementing a battle royale was not only because of the incidents he had caused. They might be a part of the reason, but Jason knew how shrewd people could be. As such, he assumed the worst while secretly hoping for the best. Most spectators couldn't understand the reason for the sudden change and thought that this was simply not fair. In order to calm them down, the Olympus Federation representative added that the races would be equally split into groups, making everything fair. With that, Jason knew that he and the others would be split, turning the entire tournament against them. From what he could tell, the Olympus Federation was willing to establish a bond with them. However, this didn't mean that they would allow the gods' children, let alone Jason, to be rewarded with anything valuable. The newest generation of the Olympus Federation was the most talented, which was the reason for the Liberation Tournament rewards to be so great, including the lower origin flame. This was not difficult to understand, and Jason simply accepted the changed rules, while transmitting his voice to Merlarths, explaining everything. At the same time, he told the God's children what was going on, and it was evident how displeased they were. Nevertheless, because they had come to Janor with an official mission as mankind's embassy, they had to hold back and act accordingly. Accepting the changes, the God's children couldn't help but feel that their chances to emerge victorious in the Liberation Tournament hadn't changed. They were still extremely low, and they had to be more focused now. This should only be subtle and nothing evident, as the Olympus Federation seemed to be eager to turn the human race into their allies. Jason found this great, and simply ignored the fact that he had to fight a total of 49 people in the next round at a time. Whis was still aying him, but Jason decided to ignore this for now. There were more important things for him, and if the young dragon wanted something from him, he should wait until everything was completed. Knowing that the next few weeks would be full of work, Jason could only hope that Whis wouldn't try to kidnap him or anything like that. That was a viable option for the dragon because he was stronger and his eyes seemed to eye Jason weirdly. As such, his mind was bringing forth the worst-case scenarios. Maybe I can make use of that. I could tell him to follow me if he wants to hear answers, while I solve my problems at the same time. I wouldn't have to fight against the human powerhouses. Is Whis even strong and knowledgeable enough to close some unstable world bridges? Jason's mind was already running wild, in hopes of leaving Argos very soon because he wanted to adventure to other planets and leave the planet that had caused him more pain than anything else. There were only a few people he would miss, and the Fleurs topped the list. His masters were dead and the most important family he was left with was always with him, his loyal soul bonds. Time passed slowly, and the first day of the Liberation Tournament ended with the conclusion of the second round and the announcement about who would fight in which of the 6 battle royales the day after. Unsurprisingly, Jason was put into the group with the strongest opponents, and he could only sigh deeply, thinking that the Olympus Federation was just too scheming. However, at the same time, excitement ignited within him, and Jason simply told himself that he wouldn't allow anyone to take away the rewards he wanted to obtain. He wanted the origin flame crystals for Solaris to allow its advancement, and even the Olympus Federation was not allowed to take this away from him. A sly smile emerged on his face as he said, "If they're going to play dirty, I won't hold back either." Turning to Jared, who looked at him with a dry smile, Jason added, "If you don't want to join hands with me tomorrow, that's fine with me, but I won't hold back, and can't promise anything." Jared was not sure why Jason said this, but seeing that Jason's golden silverish eyes stared behind him, he followed his gaze to see him looking straight at old Sadron. The young Ilian immediately understood what Jason had meant. You knew. Chapter 574 Experiment by Hydesgrain. Jason had assumed that Jared was related to old Sadron, who was among the strongest beings in the Olympus Federation, but he couldn't be sure about that before. Now he knew, but instead of saying too much, Jason brushed off Jared's question before he turned away. He was about to walk to the others when he heard Jason ask a question. "It's not as if it changes anything, right?" Jason's words could be interpreted in many ways, but Jared simply smiled before he nodded his head. "That's good. I might not be able to fight with you against the others, but I can give you one tip. Pay attention to the Dragonutes and Claria, they're likely to focus on you tomorrow." Nodding his head, Jason walked back to the God's children, who were currently talking about the opponents they would have to fight the day after. Apparently, every group had a few strong individuals, but almost every member of Jason's Battle Royale group was a prodigy. It was as if the Olympus Federation wanted to focus on him while allowing the other prodigies to fight with each other, predetermining the winner of the Liberation Tournament. If his perception was not wrong, his group's Battle Royale should be the deciding factor on who would win the tournament, as the most prodigious participants were gathered in one group. This was annoying and at the same time, extremely exciting for Jason, who was eager to fight strong opponents. He knew that tomorrow's battle royale was the most important, as the other opponents that would come out victorious of the remaining battle royales were unlikely to turn into a challenge which was somewhat ridiculous. To think that Olympus Federation ignores the Liberation Tournament's rules just to throw all prodigies at me, if that's really the case, they're definitely afraid of me. Jason was not sure if he was overestimating himself to think that the government cared about him so much, or his guess was spot on. In the end, it didn't matter, and he and the God's children returned to Merle Arths and the other human powerhouses before they left the Colosseum. Returning to the training hall that also had a dorm where they could rest, Jason went to sleep, not wasting any more time that would prevent him from recuperating from his exhaustion. The day had been long and it was finally time for him to rest, without anyone bothering him. His mind was at peace and he slept for half a day before he woke up. Jason was fully energized and his mana core filled to the brim as he got out of the bed. He didn't even think about the soul fraction within his body, because his mind was occupied with the facts that it might be possible for him to terminate the Fleur's soul contract, Whis' interest in him, or the way the Olympus Federation tweaked the tournament rules to out him and the God's children at a huge disadvantage. After washing up, Jason went inside the kitchen to look if there was something to eat, but noticed that they hadn't been provided with food. As such, he had to take out dishes from his spatial ring, which he ate without any complaints. Through the Emperor eyes, Jason noticed that the others were already awake and he walked towards them, only to see that they were analyzing all kinds of information they had obtained from the tournament management. Unfortunately, they had been unable to read much, as the universal language skills were still not up to the mark. Because of that, they had been eagerly waiting for Jason to wake up and help them understand. Hence, they almost pounced upon him when he entered the training hall. There were still a few hours left before the first battle royale would start, and Jason wanted to test out a few things with his soul world and the soul bond contract, but he was interrupted by the God's children pleading with him to help them. Initially, he'd wanted to reject them, but then an idea flashed into his mind. Clearing his throat, he gave them a sly smile before putting on a serious expression and telling the God's children that something bad was about to happen. Their eyes went wide at his words and a few of them gulped nervously, wanting to retreat and leave Jason alone. However, his next words made him feel like beating Jason into a pulp, ignoring the fact that he had become stronger than any of them. That was how ridiculous Jason's words sounded. I can help you guys, but I need your help too. Can one of you guys make an enslavement soul pact with anyone, except me? I want to test if it's possible to terminate an enslavement contract by binding the enslaved being with a soul bond contract. I will terminate the soul bond contract the moment I figure out the truth. Jason knew that it sounded ridiculous, but he wanted to figure out if his approach to save the Fleurs was correct. As such, he was straightforward with his friends, who looked at him as if he was insane. Jason, are you sure you're fine? We should probably search for Merle, maybe he can take Jason to the medics. It was Tom who said this worriedly. Meanwhile, Betty stared at Jason with squinted eyes. She was sure that Jason was not playing around, but that made everything even more ridiculous. This was also the reason why Tom thought Jason was suffering from some mental health issues due to the day before, where many unbelievable things had happened. However, Jason was adamant in his request. Don't you guys trust each other? I doubt anyone here would accept being someone else's slave under normal conditions, and that's not what I want either. I just need to test something out. It's very important to me, but if you guys feel uncomfortable with that, it's fine too. I can just wait before we return, where I can test this out with some humans who are still enslaved. Obviously, I can still help you guys with the translations. The God's children didn't know a lot about Jason, and they could tell that he himself was unsure about his identity, at least to some extent. However, hearing that there was something extremely important Jason had to figure out made the others feel intrigued. Because of that, Betty said, "If you tell me the reason why you want to test this weird experiment without beating around the bush, or at least provide a short summary, I might help you." She didn't promise anything because it was evident how dangerous it could be to enter an enslavement soul pact, let alone turn into someone else's soul bond. The latter was something that had already been tested out sparingly before, simply because it was too disadvantageous. Binding another human with a soul world to one's own soul could lead to repulsive reactions, destroying both souls, and this could work only if the soul contractor had a dominant soul world. In the end, the benefits of binding another human were negligible too, because they didn't amplify the soul contractor's strength, which could be used as a means to find a loophole within the soul world. Jason was likely to have a dominant soul world, and none of the God's children doubted this because Jason had once shown a part of his soul world to them. As such, they knew what kind of miraculous existence Jason's soul world was. Though this did not completely negate all the dangers, as long as Jason terminated the soul bond contract after terminating the enslavement soul pact, everything should be fine. Somehow, Betty felt intrigued about this, and the others couldn't help but feel that the insane idea held some merit. Seeing this, Jason decided to tell his friends everything about the Fleurs, in addition to what had happened on Asterix after he had left the place. The God's children were independent forces and had no ties to the Drake clan, which was the reason Jason spoke freely. He knew that his chances of receiving their help would increase after telling them the entire truth without holding anything back. Because of that, he felt even better. As he narrated his story, the others listened intently while Betty revealed her anger towards the Drake clan as she jumped up and cursed. "This son of a bitch." Chapter 575, Supremacy by Hydesgrain. If Jason's experiment worked, normal enslavement soul pacts would lose their worth, turning into nothing but scrap as long as someone with a dominant soul world was eager to rescue everyone. Even though the Great Argos War has ended, the situation is still tense. As the Myoldra race continues to be the Drake clan's staunch supporter, nobody can attack them. At least, not without them waging another war against us. It would cause a chain reaction and we wouldn't be able to survive this time. Another attack of the Overlord beasts is not something we would want at any cost. As such, or even we might be able to lower the Drake clan's combat strength by a vast amount. Most of their powerhouses, let alone newer generations of the clan members, are in an enslavement soul pact after all. Jason was no Samaritan, and he had only planned to help the Fleurs, but when he heard what Ben said right after Betty had calmed down from her rant, caused him to think about everything more thoroughly. Hearing what Ben said, Jason couldn't help but feel that the young man was more righteous than he was. Thus, he smiled lightly while the others seemed to be convinced about trying out Jason's insane idea. Only Xenia was somewhat reluctant, but both Ben and Betty volunteered to sign an enslavement soul pact with any of the God's children. As such, Tom made the soul pact, and enslaved Ben, while the rest of them observed everything precisely. After that, they had to test if everything was working, which caused Tom to ask Ben several questions. Wanting to test the pact as well as know something he had assumed for a long time, he said, "If you're in love with anyone, tell me the name." Tom's last question was mean because he had already sensed something about Ben's love interest. However, looking at Ben's face, he seemed to have never told the truth to anyone but was now forced to speak. Yet, before anything could happen, Tom added in a demanding tone, "Whisper the name into my ear." Ben was one of Tom's best friends. As such, he didn't want to throw him into the pit of fire. Apparently, Ben was still uncomfortable and wanted to leave, but was forced to answer due to the enslavement soul pact. "I knew it," Tom exclaimed before Ben retreated with an ashen white face. He seemed to be lost, and seeing his dejected expression, Xenia intervened. "Wasn't that a little bit too much, Tom? We just wanted to figure out whether the soul pact works or not. There was no need to peek into his personal life." Jason nodded his head when he heard this, but Tom's smile as an answer caused Jason's interest to skyrocket. "So it works like that," he thought inwardly before he clasped his hands, attracting the others' attention. "Now that we've figured out that the enslavement soul pact is working properly, I will bind you with my soul, all right?" I have more than enough soul crystals, and a high amount of soul energy, so there shouldn't be anything wrong with that. With that being said, Jason and the God's children completed their preparations while Merle and the other human powerhouses were oblivious to the revolutionary occurrence happening right under their noses. If they were to know what the 6 young men and women were doing, they would have prevented them from going ahead because there had been many things that had already been tested out with the soul world. Unfortunately, there had been more accidents than one could think of, and it couldn't be considered the best move to test out the supremacy of a certain soul with a God's child's soul. It was already superior to every other soul world existing in mankind's history except Jason's. There was a reason the human prodigies were referred to as the God's children, and it was only fortunate that it was Jason who tried to subdue Ben with his soul world and not one of the other God's children. While the others looked at Jason with tense expressions, he took a deep breath to calm down. Slowly, he loosened a thread of his soul which he shot towards Ben, who was 2 meters in front of him, without hesitation. At that moment a faint shockwave of mysterious energies swept through the training hall, attracting the human powerhouse's attention. A moment later they had appeared in the training hall, only to see 4 God's children standing around Jason and Ben, who were doing something. While Ben had to grit his teeth in pain, Jason released more and more of his soul thread, intertwined with huge amounts of soul energy. Right now, Jason's soul energy had no use because his soul bonds were growing at a rate slower than the soul energy replenishment rate. Jason had no intention to contract another soul bond for the time being either because his vessel had to be further reinforced while the wound left behind after Scorpio's death in his heart had yet to heal. If he were to bind another beast to his soul, the decision would be irrevocable, turning the new soul bond into his family instantly, and Jason would never allow him to be severely injured. Due to his emperor eyes, Jason could see every detail about what was happening right now. As such, he perceived how Ben's soul was trying to fight off Jason's soul thread, only to be overpowered and slowly forced into submission. Jason's soul thread was mostly white with golden and silver strands intertwined with each other that were the colors representing Jason as an individual. The more soul energy he used to oppress, the weaker Ben's defenses became as he accepted being turned into a soul bond of Jason. Under normal circumstances, one would actively fight against this kind of submission, but the current situation was different. They were just testing if it was possible to terminate an enslavement soul pact without the enslaved party's resistance. If that worked with Ben, whose soul world was extremely strong, everything else should work too. Time passed slowly, and Merle had already appeared next to the other God's children in order to observe what they had been up to. It was interesting, but Merle as well as the other human powerhouses couldn't help but feel as if the young generation was too hasty. Had they known that Jason was extremely confident that his assumption would work as well as his gut feeling that told him everything was doing fine, Merle would have probably called him an idiot. One might think that they were foolish, but the excitement originating from the possibility of being able to terminate certain enslavement soul pacts was too interesting. While Jason's soul had already overwhelmed Ben's, he had accidentally forced it out, leading to a gigantic soul world behind Jason that was continuously enlarging. The surrounding was lit up, and everyone could see the multitude of affinity wisps levitating through his soul world, making them witness a shocking sight. When he noticed this, Jason retracted it within a moment, only to be caught before he said, "I'm done with the soulbound contract." The connection between Jason's soul world core and Ben's was only faint, but it was evident that Jason had become the dominant force because he was completely unfazed while Ben grit his teeth in an effort to survive the pressure. "It feels way more uncomfortable than expected. The enslavement soul pact is trying to tear me apart for becoming the subordinate of someone else, but the soulbound contract prevents this from occurring." With that knowledge, Jason couldn't help but feel as if he had taken a major step in figuring out a solution as he said, "Now let's destroy the enslavement soul pact." Chapter 576 Alone by Hydesgrain. Destroying the soul pact was not as difficult as Jason expected it to be and was quite easily done. After he had overwhelmed Ben's soul, and become his soul bond contractor, the enslavement soul pact lost some of its potency. This prevented Tom, who had become Ben's master owing to the Enslavement Soul Pact's regulations, to order Ben to kill himself, or Jason. Even though that was interesting, it was more important for Jason to figure out the exact procedure of destroying an Enslavement Soul Pact. Thus, Jason used his Emperor eyes to perceive everything about Ben, his new soulbond's soul and state. A few minutes passed and it was only then that Jason started moving. Using the soul connection he and Ben had, Jason transferred some of his aura to Ben in order to envelop the imprint on his youngest soulbond's soul. This imprint was in fact the Enslavement Soul Pact. Once the Soul Pact was enveloped, it began to squirm violently, which caused Ben to feel unbearable pain. As such, Jason stopped a moment later, before he started to ponder once again. A few seconds later he released his soul world, increasing the transferred soul energy as well as his dominance over the soul connection. With that, Jason started to use his own soul to nearly annex Ben's, before he began to push the soul imprint made by the enslaving Soul Pact out. This was only possible because Jason's soul thread had entered the inner parts of Ben's soul, allowing him to slowly push the foreign imprint out of Ben's soul that was oblivious to everything that was happening. Because it was not Ben who actively pushed out the soul imprint, the Enslavement Soul Pact didn't activate itself, and Jason could remove it as if it was a small foreign object inside one's body. No scar was left behind on Ben's soul, and the soul imprint that required energy to be empowered started to disintegrate. In the end, it had only been possible to remove the Enslavement Soul Pact because Jason's soul was superior to Ben's and that the young god's child's soul had been slightly altered the moment he had been bound to Jason's soul. This slight alteration made a huge difference to the Soul Pact, making everything in the following steps possible. The entire procedure took less than 10 minutes and Jason retracted his aura, the overflowing soul energy, and the soul thread that had entered Ben's soul. It had been a painful experience for Ben, causing an uncomfortable feeling within the young man. Nevertheless, it was a necessary step, and it was not long after that Jason terminated the soul bond contract with Ben, releasing him from his forced state of submission. The termination didn't hurt their souls, as the connection between them had not yet stabilized and everyone was able to return to their routine life as if nothing had happened. This was the most important, and the only downside was that Ben was currently feeling exhausted. A few hours of rest would be more than enough, and he would be ready to fight in the 6th group of the Battle Royale without any issues. Meanwhile, Jason was already deep in thoughts, with a vibrant smile on his face as began to visualize how to make use of the knowledge they had acquired. It was only when Merl grasped his shoulders while saying his name several times that Jason regained his senses, returning to the training hall. Jason. Finally, you're back. Tell me, how did you destroy the Enslavement Soul Pact on Ben? Merl's eyes were gleaming brightly and he had never seen so much vigor and determination in the old man's eyes, which caused Jason to look at him in confusion. However, instead of holding anything back, Jason looked around, trying to perceive the human powerhouse's facial expressions and emotional hue that enveloped them before he explained everything in a detailed manner. Because Jason was not sure which clan was working with which, he could only trust the minute details his Emperor eyes could perceive, hoping that the God's children and 6 powerhouses wouldn't misuse the knowledge they acquired from him. If an enslavement soul pact could be destroyed as easily as Jason described it, the God's children should be able to do the same with all kinds of soul pacts as long as their soul was stronger than both sides who had signed the soul pact. There were all kinds of clauses that could be added, preventing the removal of a soul pact, and one simple clause would be that an enslaved being has to prevent being soul bond contracted by all means possible. Jason had already figured this out, which could be annoying for the future. Thankfully, it didn't involve Jason and his mission to save the Fleurs. That was something he knew for sure, as both Greg and Malia had already told him what kind of clauses their soul pact had. After Jason had explained everything in a detailed manner, he couldn't help but add that it was only his experience and that it could work differently for others. There were too many unknown factors, and everyone else agreed to this. However, what Jason didn't tell anyone was that he had sensed something deep within his soul world. To be precise, it had been within his soul world core, something he couldn't comprehend yet. Despite the mysterious unknown, Jason was not scared at all. Instead, he felt an overly familiar sensation brushing past his soul, touching it lightly, only to seemingly disperse. He couldn't describe the feeling, but he could barely calm down himself as he left the soul world, without realizing that the golden scorpion on his soul world was gleaming faintly. Once Jason was done reporting his experience, Merle and the other human powerhouses began to lecture Jason and the God's children because they had been doing something that could have gone horribly wrong. Jason was aware of this and the others too, but they simply heard their scolding, knowing that Merle and the rest had just been worried. Hours passed by and Ben had recuperated from his exhaustion just before the first battle royale was about to start. They had already entered the Colosseum and Jason had finished his preparations before he walked inside the arena, where the other prodigies were already waiting. Being stared at by 49 glaring pairs of eyes was not really comfortable, and Jason noticed that even Jared was glaring at him while smiling inwardly at the same time. This looked somewhat grotesque, but instead of saying anything, he retained his calm and serious attitude. The tension within the arena was apparent, but that was not only caused because of Jason. Even though the Olympus Federation was one organization consisting of multiple migrating races, every race had its own origin and they had been forced to collude with each other in order to survive. Combining their forces had been the best move they could have done. However, this didn't mean that any of the migrating races wanted another one from procuring more resources than they could obtain. As such, the Liberation Tournament was not only a celebration to have migrated to Argos but also a competition for every race to show that they were stronger than the remaining races within the Olympus Federation. Chapter 577 Ariel by Hydesgrain. The average cultivation base of the opponents he would have to face at once was at the mid-7th Lick stage. This may not seem like much, considering how strong Jason was, but every single of the 49 opponents in the first round of the Battle Royale was extremely strong, allowing them to reach an average combat prowess of the 10th Lick stage. If every single one of them would attack him at once, Jason wouldn't have a way to emerge victoriously. However, he had already set up a plan, which allowed him to make use of the large number of different races that should have been told to attack him first. Unfortunately, attacking someone with a total of 48 other individuals couldn't be described as the most intelligent move, which was what Jason wanted to make use of. The races inside the arena were the Rans, Clariers, Dragonutes, Elians, and the demi-human races called Tigran, Hamar, Fyrmn, and Liza. Thus, with a total of 8 races that were also preying on each other, it would be quite difficult to overwhelm Jason, even more so with the different combat styles and ways they would approach him. It didn't take long before everyone had gathered and the spectators were already eager to witness how the first round of the new tournament called Battle Royale would start. Everyone knew that the first round was the most important because the strongest prodigies of all races were present. Whether this was intentional or not, nobody cared as it was exciting to look at. The fighting ground was the entire interior space of the Colosseum, which was more than enough place for a total of 50 participants to fight against each other at a time. Jason didn't really care where he should position himself before the Battle Royale started because it wouldn't matter much either way. However, instead of eyeing everyone at once, Jason only looked at the buff Dragonute, who was the strongest amongst his peers. Smiling lightly, he couldn't help but feel that he and the Dragonutes had one particular trait that made him the best target for the first step in his plan. With that thought in mind, he smiled lightly as the start of the first Battle Royale was initiated. While the others utilized their affinity by throwing an elemental attack at him, ginormous black flame wings sprouted out of his back before he catapulted himself several meters in the air. Flapping the black flame wings, he continued to ascend before he reached an altitude of 50 meters. It was still possible for him to reach a higher altitude because the Colosseum had no ceiling, but instead of doing something unnecessarily, he smiled at the Dragonute prodigy. Khan, how about a small fight in the sky? Khan was the name of the Dragonute's most talented youngest prodigy, who had a cultivation base at the low 8th Lick stage. His dragon bloodline was said to be higher than other Dragonutes, while his family made it possible for him to stay in the broken world for a longer time than others. There, he was rumored to have increased his cultivation base at a rapid pace, while focusing on his combat training. As such, everything Jason could see thanks to his Emperor eyes was the basic foundation of his opponent and not his entire combat prowess. Khan didn't have a special constitution like Jared, but based on the Dragonewt's aura that Jason perceived, he could tell that Khan was an even more dangerous opponent. Thus, he wanted to fight him first in order to be able to move in the air to recuperate from possible injuries or exhaustion without the fear of someone strong pursuing him. To defeat Khan, allowing Solaris to enter Jason's mana core was the best option due to the Black Origin Flame's superiority. At least, Jason hoped his flame to be superior and hoped that it would enable him to take advantage of the Dragonewt prodigy. In the end, the first step of his plan worked as expected and the Dragonewts including Khan used their wings to ascend into the sky. There had yet to be a prodigy below the age of 50 who was able to solidify their first prismarine crystal, allowing them to break into the Prisma stage. As such, nobody except the Dragonewts and those that were able to manifest elemental wings on their back could fly. If another prodigy were to follow him and the Dragonewts, this wouldn't be a problem for him because he didn't have to focus on his black flame wings as Solaris was shaping them, lifting a huge burden from Jason's shoulders. The other prodigies without wings would have to use their concentration to shape and sustain elemental wings. Because of that, there were only 5 Dragonewts with an average cultivation base at the 7th lick stage and Khan in the front, smiling arrogantly at him. You shouldn't have done that. Escaping into the sky might seem like a smart strategy, but you just gave up on creating chaos on the ground. Forcing them to fight each other might be logical, but you will never be able to defeat them, let alone escape me and the others behind me. Though Khan was arrogant, he was rational enough to tell the other Dragonewts to join the fight and help him defeat Jason. This was something logical, but he had seen idiots that gave up on their advantages because of their pride, more often than he wanted to acknowledge. How about we fight instead of talking rubbish? Jason asked with a sly smile before he manifested a dozen black flame spears. He could control them as if it didn't take him any effort and the large black flame wings behind him flapped twice, catapulting him to the front. Jason didn't hesitate to confront Khan directly despite his high cultivation base. As such, the young Dragonewt prodigy couldn't help but feel excitement igniting within him as his entire body released bright red flames. Nobody shall hold back. Attack! Upon hearing Khan, the 5 Dragonewts behind him unleashed their flames that enveloped them slowly, which was entirely different to Khan, whose control over his affinity was exceptional in comparison. Khan had already manifested multiple fireballs which he shot towards Jason, without needlessly moving them around to show off his control. At least that was what Khan had assumed about Jason's trick, only to see a bright smile on his face. Even though Khan was at the 8th lick stage, his affinity was only slightly stronger. He was not a dragon whose affinity was stronger than their cultivation base, and neither had he inherited someone's affinity as Jason had. Thus, Solaris black flames were innately stronger than Khan's. While Jason was still moving around the spears of black flames, he was already planning something in advance. Thus, he threw a few of them towards the fireballs that approached him with a rapid pace, destroying them easily. This caused a thin smoke screen to form temporarily, preventing anyone from seeing the other side. At least that was what Khan expected as he shot through the smokescreen, appearing right in front of Jason, who was empty-handed, while he had already manifested a gigantic broadsword out of his affinity. This was extremely difficult and Jason would have acknowledged this feat, if not for the waste of precious mana. As such, instead of doing the same, Jason simply summoned Byakuya, which he enveloped in a thin layer of Solaris black flames before he made use of the biggest advantage both of them had. Even though Solaris and Jason were considered one entity, their minds worked separately. Thanks to that, it was possible for multiple complex tasks to occur at the exact same time. While Jason clashed with Khan, who saw an opportunity for his subordinates to finish off the young human, Jason just smiled as a glint of slyness could be seen in his eyes that seemed to say, Thanks for walking right into my trap. At that moment, Khan wanted to warn the other Dragon Youths, telling them to stay away from Jason, only to realize that it was already too late. The 5 Dragon Youths had already gathered around Jason in a loose circle and were ready to severely injure him with the short swords they had manifested out of the fire they controlled. While they brandished their swords at Jason, his smile only widened, which told them something was wrong. It took the 5 Dragon Youths a moment to realize that time seemed to have slowed down as they realized that they had missed something essential. How could it be so easy for us to appear next to him? Chapter 578 Control by Hydesgrain. To the 5 Dragon Youths, who were just realizing that something was wrong, it seemed as if time had slowed down. Everything in front of them began to change and terror unfolded right in front of their eyes. Considering that the human in front of them was considered to be extremely terrifying and the things he had done in both the Decimator rounds and the combat rounds, it had been too easy for them to approach and attack him. However, that was only something they had realized a moment too late. Jason had planned to release the race-specific weakening curse but figured out that this was not even required in order to take out the first bunch of opponents. Khan could be taken care of later, but the 5 Dragon Youths were more like pestering fleas, distracting him with their annoying buzz. However, he didn't mind them and it was part of his plan, the reason he had summoned large black flame wings instead of small ones with which he could change his trajectory more easily. With a crafty smile on Jason's face, the black flame wings stiffened midair as he stopped flapping them abruptly. A quarter of a second later their shape changed and the huge black wings split up into 100 blazing spikes that were controlled by both Jason and Solaris at the same time. Both of them worked in perfect sync to slowly avert their trajectory and turned the spikes towards the 5 attacking Dragon Youths before they sent them shooting straight at their opponents without any further delay. Each of the 5 Dragon Youths was bombarded with several black blazing spikes, searing through their flesh. Tiny fragments of Solaris flames embedded themselves within their bodies, burning them from the inside out. All of this took a mere second and the moment the black wings dispersed, the gravitational force started to work, pulling Jason towards the ground. Yet, instead of falling down and leaving the aerial battlefield, tiny black flames manifested a few centimeters below Jason's feet, only to explode a second later. The explosion propelled Jason a few meters higher into the air, which gave Solaris enough time to manifest another batch of black flame wings. While the 5 Dragon Youths had been pierced by several black blazing spears and were burning from the inside, the fire draining them of their mana and life force, Khan didn't hesitate to attack Jason. His eyesight and reflexes were exceptional, allowing Khan to perceive what the exploding black fireball allowed Jason to do. Even though it elevated Jason's position, he was also forced to divert his focus on his wings for a moment that didn't leave him any scope to change his position. This short moment was more than enough for Khan to manifest another flaming broadsword into his free hand. While brandishing both flaming broadswords, Khan could only see a distinct gleam in Jason's eyes as he perceived tremendous changes all around both of them. Earlier, Jason hadn't utilized his Celestia aura and stigma properly, and he had yet to use any of his other abilities. As such, Khan was astonished to see that his body instinctively flinched when Jason released the petrification curse. However, its potency had reduced drastically due to Khan's innate defenses, only to face the full brunt of the race-specific weakening curse. Jason refrained himself from using the abyssal ability because he felt as if the ability was something he should test out before using it once again. The last time he had used it, he hadn't been able to control it. Thus, he decided to not use it right now. Despite that, the 2 curses he had activated were already more than enough to give him a quarter of a second, which he used to envelop Byakuya with a thin membrane of Solaris flames in addition to another layer of his own mana. With a swift swing, accelerated through the floating sky movement technique he could barely utilize, Byakuya sliced through the wind, only to cut through the flaming broadswords. It was fortunate for Jason that the flaming swords hadn't enveloped any swords made out of high-grade materials, otherwise, the difficulty to cut through the natural resistance of dense metals might have turned into a problem. Because this was not the case, Jason had been able to deflect Khan's broadswords and prevent him from inflicting an injury. They were still fighting in the air, but Jason's position was more than half a meter above Khan. From the outside, it looked like they were on equal footing, which meant that their fight would only drain each other's mana reserves. However, reality spoke otherwise. By using a large amount of mana, Jason could end the fight against Khan, the Dragon Newt. However, that was not something he should do if he wanted to prevent being surprise attacked in a weakened state. In the end, there was still more than 40 opponents on the ground, and they had just started fighting against each other. Yet, based on a single glance towards the ground, Jason's Emperor eyes perceived that their fights were rather boring. He found that a majority of them were reluctant to fight against each other seriously in order to prevent utilizing too much mana at once. As such, Jason couldn't just use a majority of mana to subdue Khan, just to defeat him. He had to plan several situations at once, including the aftermath of defeating someone. Because of that, Jason made a risky decision which caused a smile to emerge on his face that caused Khan to realize that something was wrong. Trying to leave, Khan flapped his wings hastily, only to feel Jason's tight grasp around his shoulders. Jason had retracted Byakuya into the soul world while increasing his physical strength by allowing Petri to occupy his mana core. This caused his control over the black flame wings to decrease rapidly. However, that was not worrisome because Jason had already retracted the flames on his back. There was only one large black fireball behind his back, while the remaining flames had been absorbed by Solaris, converted into the mana it had been. Khan was astonished by the sudden increase in Jason's strength. How can his physical strength increase so suddenly? It's at par with mine even without the use of any mana, at the middle of the 8th Lick stage. Earlier, he had assumed that Jason's strength was high, which made him order the other Dragon Youths to join his attack, but to think that he had been hiding even more secrets was unbelievable. At that moment, Khan's eyes widened as black scales, with patterns of golden veins spreading through them, grew on Jason's body, with a 3-meter-long tail growing out of his coccyx. Only then did he hear a faint voice. "Watch out!" By the time Khan heard these two simple words of a warning, it was already too late, and the large black fireball behind Jason's back exploded, catapulting the two young prodigies towards the ground. The gravitational force did its job as Jason's weight had increased to over 100 kilograms with Petri's manifested body parts, pulling them towards the ground. After the explosion behind Jason occurred, Khan realized the young man's plan, which forced him to react in haste. Out of instinct, he released every ounce of mana within him, only to envelop his body and brace for impact. Fuck. As if I would give up now. Chapter 579 King. Reluctant to lose the fight against Jason, Khan glared right into Jason's eyes before he tried to lift his arms. It took him a second in order to move them while he was tightly held by Jason. However, when he was finally ready, Khan used some of the mana he had released and traces from his surroundings to exert the secret technique he'd learned at a young age, manifesting a sky blue flame around his body. They were searing hot and burned through everything they touched, matching the deadly effects of Solaris, astonishing Jason for a moment before he closed his eyes as his entire head was enveloped in thick, black scales. The moment Jason was fully enveloped and protected by Petri's black scales, both Jason and Khan crashed right into the center of the arena, causing thunderous noises as the ground cracked, pushing Khan into the ground. Dirt, sand, and debris were stirred up, blocking everyone's sight, as an eerie silence filled the Colosseum once again. Everyone thought Khan had died as the blue flames disappeared a moment after he was catapulted into the ground with such a high speed that most spectators weren't even able to perceive what exactly had happened. To them, Jason's appearance had changed midair, while the black flame wings had turned into a large black fireball. They had watched in fascination as the fireball's explosion catapulted both Jason and Khan towards the ground, only for a blue flame to manifest around them a moment before the impact occurred. Not only the spectators but even the higher-ups stiffened upon sensing how dangerous Jason's attack that drained only a small amount of mana truly was. Fearing that Khan had met his demise, the Dragon Youth's echelons released their mana fluctuations in fear. However, they took a collective breath of relief to notice that he had only lost consciousness while sustaining external injuries. As such, they averted their attention towards Jason for a short moment and were shocked to realize that he was completely fine. His mana fluctuations weren't even disrupted, which caused them to stiffen as one of the elders rushed towards the arena to carry Khan, their strongest prodigy, out of the arena, and take him to the infirmary. This didn't attract any attention because the dust, debris, and sand were still covering everyone's sight. It took a few seconds before the commotion caused by Jason died down, while the young man scratched his back that was singed and had a few missing black scales. "Sorry, Petri." He transmitted his apologies to his youngest soulbond, who could only complain, before transferring his pain to Jason. Smiling lightly, Jason assisted the regrowth of the burned scales by using the nutrition within him. His eyes were covered by a thin golden membrane that was connected to the scales, turning Petri's scales into full-scale armor. This was interesting, and Jason couldn't help but feel excited, as he had never really used his soulbond's fortified soul conjunction in such a way. They were much more versatile than he had thought in the beginning, and even the God's children thought that Jason was using his soulbonds pretty well. In the end, they had learned everything about the beasts they were told to form a soulbond contract with, long before the binding process was even initiated. As such, they knew everything about their soulbonds, at least, that was what they had assumed. However, Jason had taught them that this was not the case, because he had shown them something they had never thought to be possible: a proper fusion of a soulbond and its contractor. Jason had himself found this out recently, but Artemis and his fusion amplified their strength, which made it possible for them to elevate their combat prowess. Owing to that, every battle Jason fought was extremely interesting to the God's children, because they hoped to comprehend something they hadn't realized before. Taking a deep breath, Jason felt exhilarated to achieve his first victory. He had noticed that Khan had been taken away, and by using his Emperor eyes properly, Jason could tell how the situation on the ground looked like. His physical strength was at par with someone with a cultivation base at the mid of the 8th Lick stage, only to further increase by utilizing the floating sky movement technique in addition to circulating mana through his body. As such, Jason didn't fear anyone right now, as his heart thundered loudly, in sync with Petri, who was eager to fight as it roared out within the mana core. When Jason heard this roar, he felt something deep within him that caused him to instinctively release his Celestia aura and stigma at once. Petri's stigma ignited, enlightening the mana core as a faint thread was released from it, making its way towards the young soulbond. At that moment, the roar Petri had issued was amplified from the depths of Jason's body as he released it. The thunderous roar reverberated throughout the entire Colosseum, shaking its foundation, while the authorities at the Prisma stage released their mana to keep the Colosseum intact, preventing it from cracking. While the roar shocked everyone, the faint image of a second reversed wing manifested above his stigma. Jason's eyes turned into golden silverish slits, subconsciously releasing the curses Petri harbored. But that was not all, because the black-scaled, golden-veined armor was slowly merging with Jason's skin, enlarging further. The scale armor was slowly turning into Jason's skin as his hands began to transform too. Razor-sharp blades seemed to grow out of the tip of his finger, forcing Jason to endure unbearable pain, as he felt an uncomfortable itch all over his body. Petri had formed a faint connection with Jason's mana core, causing his body to enlarge by 20 centimeters as the serpent tail enlarged to a length of 5 meters before it stopped growing. It was only then that Jason felt the urge to lift it before swinging it onto the ground of the arena that cracked a little due to the impact. Through this, Jason could tell that his strength had increased drastically as he took a quick glance at his mana core. "Are we ready for that? You were eager to fuse with me too, huh?" he thought, only to sense that the connection with Solaris wouldn't be able to be maintained for long. This seemed to be a restriction of having a weaker soul connection than Jason had with Artemis. Nevertheless, it was more than enough to show everyone that he, and his soulbond, the Basilisk Petri, were not to be taken lightly. There was a reason why the Basilisk was called the King of Serpents. Their roar was only a warning, and a sign they gave to their opponents that they wouldn't show any mercy to the others if someone were to cross the line. While Jason was overly excited, the Colosseum stopped shaking while the spectators were able to finally see something, as the smoke cleared, revealing Jason and the remaining participants. Yet, before anyone could say something, the ground below Jason began to crack as he pushed himself towards the closest opponent. With a natural physical strength at the mid-8th lick stage in addition to the fusion's drastic enhancement, Jason's speed was terrifying. Only those that had unique movement techniques and an extremely high cultivation base were barely able to face him. Jason activated the floating sky movement technique while circulating a large amount of mana through his body. In an instant, he could cross the distance of 100 meters, which was the shortest distance to his closest opponent. The Clarier Jason faced could barely realize that he was about to be attacked, only to look straight into Jason's golden silverish serpent eyes that temporarily paralyzed and weakened him. Before he had time to react, Jason's flat hand pushed against his chest, breaking several bones and ribs. He was flung towards the arena's wall where he slumped to the ground, losing consciousness before he could even curse at Jason. With this action, Jason showed everyone that it was the time to fight for their lives, to give their utmost efforts to overcome the threat coming from him, a halfling, who released the aura of a real king. Chapter 580 to 3 minutes by Hydesgrain. Jason assumed that his fusion with Petri would only sustain for around 3 minutes. As such, he didn't hesitate and attacked the closest opponent without wasting any time. The floating sky technique was fully utilized, and his speed reached a horrifying degree, while his physical strength was more than enough to finish off the opponents in front of him. Taking a deep breath, Jason could only smile lightly as he looked at the Clarier whom he had punched into the wall. While looking at his hand that had fused into a reptile-like claw, the excitement within him ignited. Jason had always thought that the human race was weak, that the only advantage was their soul world and the amplification they received. However, that was wrong because he had just begun to realize that mankind had yet to figure out how profound the soul world truly was. He knew that his connection with his soul bonds was becoming stronger at a rapid pace, which was mainly owing to the Celestia race's innate amity with all kinds of beasts. As such, he assumed that he was the first one to figure out that the soul world was so profound. This was exhilarating, not only for Jason, but also for the human powerhouses and even more so for the God's children, who realized what Jason was doing. Another fusion. Betty mumbled, only for the others to nod their head. Their eyes were glimmering in excitement and it was almost as if Jason was setting a path for them to walk upon. It looked like he was paving the way forward while showing what the human race was capable of. Since the foreign races had attacked, and almost enslaved the human race, the citizens and even some members of big clans had lost their spark and will to get back on their feet. They lived in constant fear, thinking that it wouldn't take long before the foreign races would return. At the same time, everyone realized that they were too weak, which was mostly owing to the book Jason had released. In the beginning, only a few people had believed his words, but that had changed with time because it was evident that Jason didn't lie to them. As such, upon realizing the truth, most citizens began to fear the future. Because of this, the things Jason did right now were more important to God's children, the present human powerhouses, and entire mankind. Their future was not bleak and they had many things to discover, allowing them to become much stronger than they were used to be. Jason's Celestia aura that had merged with the stigmas was visible above his right eye and was slowly changing, taking on the aura of a wild beast, as he turned towards the next opponent. The wild aura he released radiated a distinct suppression. It was completely different to the one Jason had comprehended by himself. Owing to this aura, the participants, let alone the spectators, couldn't believe that the being in front of them was a mere human and not an ancient being that had awoken from its hibernation. Petri was a basilisk in Jason's opinion, and the aura of the Serpent King seeped into the wild aura, slowly changing it, allowing Jason to dominate everything in his surrounding, reigning supreme in his proximity. Not wasting his precious time, Jason pushed his feet from the ground as he appeared in front of the second opponent. It was one of the strongest prodigies from the Lysa race that were also called Lizardmen and was at the 9th lick stage. Yet, Instead of paying any attention to the Lysa's cultivation base, Jason stared into the young man's reptilian eyes, which held traces of reverence before the petrification curse and race-specific weakening curse kicked in. This distracted the Lysa further, giving Jason more than enough time to slash out with his razor-sharp claw-like hands, inflicting severe injuries as they cut through the thick scales covering the Lysa's body. They were not lethal, but strong enough to weaken his opponent's combat prowess, which was more than enough for Jason, who spun around, using his 5-meter-long tail to lash at the Lysa race's prodigy. He was still able to fight, but Jason hadn't planned to render his opponent weak and powerless either way. In the next 3 minutes he had to decrease his opponent's combat prowess as much as possible, preventing them from gaining an advantage over each other, or even himself once the fusion would wear off. Jason was not even sure how exhausted he would be once the fusion with Petri were to end. As such, he could only give his best while barely stopping Petri's primal instincts from killing everyone who blocked his path. This was more difficult than Jason had expected, as Petri's fusion felt a lot different than Artemis, who was rather gentle and not driven by her wild instincts. In Jason's opinion, Artemis may be a predator, but her nature was incomparable to Petri, who seemed to be more of an emotionless killing machine than Jason had expected his youngest soulbond to become. Nevertheless, this was something one required sometimes, and it was perfectly suitable for Jason, as he was required to kill mercilessly in certain situations. By binding a soulbond to the soul world, not only did one receive an amplification in strength, inherit someone's affinity, but in Jason's case, his instincts, reflexes, and behavior were also influenced. The same applied the other way around, and the stigma was one sign of this, as well as the deep connection. While Jason used his unparalleled speed, the others didn't remain idle. The 7 races that were left in the arena gathered together in their own groups, preparing against the bull-like charge of Jason. Yet, the moment Jason charged into the groups of participants, they realized that his charge was even more horrific than expected. He had just entered the Claria's small group of prodigies, where he wreaked havoc, not minding the highly corrosive poison that was flung at him. His entire black body that was covered with golden vein-like threads was crumbling apart, as the corrosion took effect, but Jason seemed to completely ignore it. With the subconsciously released curses Petri harbored, he weakened his opponents, only to use his superior strength to inflict severe, yet not lethal injuries, weakening the Claria's strongest prodigies while taking out the weaker ones. Only half a minute passed before Jason emerged out of the group of injured Clarias who had no energy to fight back. He calmly advanced to the next group, acting as if nothing happened. It was only when he entered the next group of opponents, made up of the Lysa, that a few higher-ups couldn't help but squint their eyes as they looked intently at Jason. Everyone watched the entire battle royale that was filled with more tension and excitement than the spectators had expected to witness after the changes had been implemented. Even Whis, who had been lamenting about his precious time being wasted to watch the tournament as per his master's wish, couldn't help but feel that he was witnessing a miracle. His focus was solely on Jason, and he told himself that he had to do something about this youth. He was way too talented to let his natural combat awareness, unique traits, let alone the origin flame, and the ability to use the chaos attribute, go to waste.